The answer to the question of what effect the menstrual cycle has on athletes is a much more complex one than most people realise. It extends far beyond the menstruation period that takes place every 28 days or so of a woman's cycle. The menstrual cycle can be an indicator of female health, a new or taboo experience for young female athletes, and can also impact sporting performance at the elite level. The way the three interconnect then speaks to the jigsaw puzzle nature of the topic, according to Sharon Madigan, the head of performance and nutrition at Sport Ireland Institute.
I think the key fundamental is, and this was what I would say, is that, it is your superpower. It is something that males don't have. And if there's any changes in that, that might be reflective of what your training pattern has happened over the last wee while. So that is something to it's a red flag. So don't just palm it off as that's normal for a female that's training hard. It's not.
This is especially true when it comes to nutrition.
Especially in athletic populations, we do find that there is a significant link between how and what and when athletes eat, and then the impact that can have on hormonal health. If there's underfueling going on, then that particular physiological pot doesn't get enough money into the bank. So what can happen is those hormones can fluctuate in ways then that impacts not only the presence or absence of a bleed, but also the levels of hormones, of which there are quite a few in there, that then can have an impact on either not bleeding, bleeding frequently, not ovulating, or other types of kind of changes that females might see. Where hormone health is really important is that we then have secondary impacts of those hormones in other areas. So for example, the female hormones are particularly important for bone health. They're bone protective. So what we see often is that those athletes who don't have a period, or there's some changes, the period might go out to maybe 60 days, and quite often that's reflective of a higher training load, maybe over the previous month. That's telling us that there's some changes there, but a lot of athletes have heard maybe that that's normal, or, oh yeah, you train a lot, so don't expect to have a period. But actually it's not where you'd want to be, because a bleed or a period is a good reflective barometer of good athlete health.
Madigan outlines the ripple effect hormone health can have on the different systems of the human body, all of which can play into the overall picture when discussing what can impact an athlete's performance. It is important then, she emphasises, for athletes to engage in open dialogue around this topic with their coaches and wider backroom teams. This is something that Niamh Fogarty knows all too well, having experienced it firsthand as an Irish international discus thrower, a coach, and also a qualified athletic therapist. She broke the Irish senior record in the women's discus throw, which had previously stood for 41 years, back in April, and speaks about the impact her late coach, Michael Brun-Jepsen, had on her career. If she could offer any advice to coaches then, what would it be?
He had asked, is there anything I can do for you guys as elite athletes? And my answer to him was, just sit down with your athletes individually and just try and get an understanding of how it affects them. And he was very good at that, at understanding the athlete. And I think that is the big thing here. If coaches are trying to support athletes, try and address it individually. Don't paint everyone with one brush. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. Everyone experiences it differently. I'm naturally menstruating. My training partner is not. We experience symptoms much differently. So we never specifically tailored training around the cycle. There's not enough evidence for that. But we did communicate with each other daily about how we're feeling.
All of those hats previously listed are without even a mention to the work she's undertaken with the She Research Centre, where she completed studies alongside Dr. Niamh Fogarty, performance lead of the programme and senior lecturer in sports science in the Department of Sport and Health Sciences in TUS Athlone. All three interviewees encourage athletes to actively track their own cycle, noting symptoms, mood and other implications over a sustained period to achieve a rounded picture. Dr. Niamh Fogarty in particular highlights the benefits of a multidisciplinary approach.
One of our more recent studies, we implemented kind of what's recognised as gold standard, maybe menstrual cycle tracking with elite athletes. And what we found was that the athletes were really responsive to implementing menstrual cycle, even though it was a little additional burden for them. We interviewed them after implementing it, and they did note that, they felt that it was a much more open conversation about the menstrual cycle, that it was no longer kind of kept quiet, that athletes were now talking about it. They were discussing it amongst themselves, and they felt more open with their practitioners as well. We also found that some athletes we worked with were experiencing some types of menstrual cycle disorders. So for us, it kind of indicated the importance of empowering athletes to understand more about their menstrual cycle.
Once you have that one-to-one relationship and an in-depth profile built up with an athlete alongside a record of their entire cycle, experts like Madigan can then pinpoint areas where they might need more support.
When you're actually looking at your athlete face to face, you have a much more in-depth profile of that particular person. So again, on a one-to-one, that gives you much more, depth and detail on whoever you're working with, so that's very nice. And we were able to say feedback to some of our athletes, well, actually, did you recognise that on the same day every month for the last 4 months you didn't sleep well? So that then sits well with, these are the reasons why we want a regular period, because we can then start to pinpoint other things where we actually might be able to have a real significant impact. Look at strategies around sleep, and we know that women can be affected in terms of their sleep much more. So putting in real practical strategies for that, which then can have a knock-on effect on other things. So for example, when people are tired in terms of their behaviours around food, they tend to go to their go-to place. For me, that would be like 150 gram bar of Galaxy for sure. So then what happens is you then have behaviours maybe that might not be conducive to what you're looking for. And then what happens sometimes is people feel guilty for doing that. So then they cut back on something else at a really important time. And you've got a vicious circle of lots of different things that are triggered by something. And sometimes people don't know what that is, but they're trying. So if you can actually give a picture of how that might look for them as an individual, you're able to kind of maybe pick one thing, have an intervention there, and actually that might have a ripple effect on other things, which then has a big impact on performance as well.
Embarrassment and awkwardness around periods and the menstrual cycle can be particularly perpetuated among young teenage girls. More communication around mood, feeling and physical energy levels in relation to the menstrual cycle will only further take away the stigma around the topic. This is something Fogarty, who now also coaches from time to time, experienced herself, and now believes needs to be tackled where possible.
It comes back to creating that comfortable environment where they feel they can just talk to you about anything. And I myself didn't get my first period until I was 16, which is a bit late. Typically the average age is like 12, 13. And I wasn't eating enough, underfueled, and I was training a lot. It was kind of when I was kind of getting serious about my athletics too. But I didn't know that, and I would have missed periods for 2 or 3 months, and I wasn't aware that that was a bad thing. I just thought, oh, I didn't get it this month, it'll come the next time. And so I wish I had known some of that information when I was younger, because I reckon I would have tried to take care of my body a little bit better.
Dr. Niamh believes there are 2 principal areas to focus on: more research to overcome the gender data gap, and distilling the research that currently exists into a more digestible format.
We do need to try and increase the quality of the research that we're producing and ensure that we are producing high quality where possible. But I think we also need to find ways to translate that research into practice. So for example, one of our research studies that interviewed coaches and did a survey with coaches and practitioners as well. Sometimes coaches, they really understand the importance of the menstrual cycle, but they don't know how to locate or implement the research that they're reading, or they find it difficult. Maybe not that they don't know how to, but coaches can let us know that they find it difficult to actually use that research in practice. So I think that as researchers is something that we need to to try and put into place, that we can get that research translation into practice, and help coaches make it a little bit more easier to translate into practice and find ways around that.
Overall, though, Fogarty believes it's important to showcase to women of all ages that every offshoot of the menstrual cycle is an interconnected structure and yet is individual to each person.
Especially at the youth level, I think there is potential to have more work done there, and creating awareness and just educating young females and female athletes about the menstrual cycle, but nutrition and body image, and like tying it all together as one, so that they can take that then into their adulthood, when they start to kind of mature a little bit more. I think there's also then always scope for educating coaches and practitioners, male and female. Like I said, even if you're female and have experienced the menstrual cycle, you don't necessarily have the same experiences as others. So I think, yeah, there's always scope to be educated and learn more. And the research is always happening in the background, and there's always new findings, and there's always ways we can improve our knowledge. So one step at a time, but I think in general it is moving in the right direction, which is really positive.
This video is part of the Same But Different series, looking at what sets women's sport apart. For more, you can follow the series on the Irish Independent.